one day as he was playing golf. He thought that it is more difficult to pretend that you do have feelings when you don't, than to pretend you don't have feelings when you do. He also thought that he liked her accent, and he'd always preferred women with short hair. So he decided that she was the one.
In his seventh film, Yorgos Lanthimos explores the socially imposed conventions on conventional relationship models and the expectation of the individual to fulfill them. In this essay, I want to deal with how the director and screenwriter satirically dissects these expectations, which are excessive as a social ideal in the dystopian and comically surreal world of the Lobster. The main character, David, is a rather uninteresting, fairly average, middle-aged white man who is abandoned by his wife for another man at the beginning of the film. He is then sent to a kind of institution whose inmates are to find a suitable partner in one of the other inmates within 45 days. If you fail to find a partner during this time, you will be transformed into an animal of your choice. The inmates can extend this period by chasing fleeing former inmates in the forest and returning them sedately to the hotel. After David is unsuccessful, he decides to flee and joins the fugitives in the forest. Here too there are rules. None of the fugitives may enter a relationship or get physically closer to one of the other fugitives. Anyone who breaks this rule will be maimed. Contrary to all requirements, David and another fugitive fall in love. When the leader of the fugitives finds out, she takes the woman's eyesight. David and the woman flee again and return to society as a couple. One of the most important leitmotifs of the film is established right from the start. People who are not in a relationship are second-class people. David is abandoned by his wife for another man, but ironically, in the world of the Lobster, he's the bad guy. He's even punished. The absurd punishments that inmates of the institution expect for violations of rules further underline this idea. Being in a relationship is constantly represented as a human ideal. In the hotel, there are performances in which the supposed dangers of being single are depicted in the most absurd way. At mealtime, single people sit at tables that are made specifically for one person. The tables are all aligned to another area of the restaurant where people who have found partners can eat together at larger tables. All single people sit so that they are forced to watch the couples eat. This idealized view of relationships is so dogmatically imprinted on the characters that they are ready to live for them without questioning them. At the shooting range, one of the inmates says,
"It's no coincidence that the targets are shaped like single people and not couples."
Another motif is established in the hotel. The inmates choose absurdly ridiculous similarities from their potential partners. The best example of which would be nosebleeds as a commonality. It is common for people to choose their partners by commonality. This tendency is exaggerated here and thus ridiculed. The nameless characters in The Lobster are even ready to pretend common ground just to impress a partner. Some go as far as to hurt themselves, like the friend with a nosebleed. Others, like the protagonist David, are ready to throw their moral principles overboard and to act against their nature. In the end, David, pretending cruelty to impress a woman, pays a terrible price for it. His brother, in the shape of a dog, is murdered by her. The absurdity of the common ground on the basis of which the characters in the film choose their partners ridicules the real courtship behavior of people in a wonderfully somber way. Lanthimos asks the question, is love just a social construct? This position is represented in the film by the leader of the fugitives. When the fugitives raid the hotel, she wants to prove her claim by testing the supposedly flawless relationship between the hotel manager and his wife. She gives him the choice to survive if he shoots his wife. The hotel manager pulls the trigger of the weapon that is placed in his hand, but which is unloaded. Is love, in the world of the Lobster, just a social construct? At this point, the viewer may be tempted to believe that, or at least that Lanthimos wants to convey this. But the film offers another way of looking at it. Despite all the improbability, David and another one of the fugitives fall in love. This is not intended in the world of the fugitives. Here too there are rules. Love and any kind of relationship is forbidden among the fugitives loneliness, or rather being alone, is idealized and exaggerated to the maximum, sarcastically represented by the ritual of digging one's own grave, or a completely absurd scene in which the fugitives dance, but each one for themselves, alone. But even in this counter-movement, rules and sanctions are taken seriously. When the leader of the fugitives learns of the relationship, she violently takes the woman's eyesight, and thus her common ground with David, her nearsightedness. What Lanthimos wants to convey here: even among people who enjoy single life, there is envy and resentment. It is not welcomed if a person from the circle of friends suddenly enters a relationship. The fugitives in the world of the Lobster are to be understood as stylized singles of our real world. People who defend themselves against the social construct of heteronormative relationship models. The society, or normal world, from which David is banned at the beginning of the film, is nothing more than a society that expects an individual to be in a relationship. Those who have none are worth less, are even sent to a kind of correctional facility, the only aim of which is to find a partner for the inmates. If you don't find a partner here, after a while you are transformed into an animal, so you are further degraded, possibly the most aggressive metaphor in the entire film. An escape from the socially imposed system is not tolerated. Anyone fleeing the hotel is literally hunted. The film establishes this motif in the first scene of the film, even before the viewer is introduced to the plot or before the main character David is seen. A woman gets out of her vehicle on a meadow and shoots a donkey. Without the context of the further course of action, this picture remains incomprehensible. Only afterwards is the viewer told what he saw at the beginning of the film. Ultimately, it doesn't matter who the woman is or whether the donkey is a former lover. The most important question regarding animal symbolism is rather, why does David choose the eponymous lobster? He mentions the following reasons.
Because lobsters live for over 100 years, are blue-blooded like aristocrats, and stay fertile all their lives. I also like the sea very much. I water ski and swim quite well since I was a teenager.
At first his choice might seem absurd. Probably very few people would answer the question of which animal they would like to be with this. In the world of the lobster, however, his choice makes perfect sense. The characteristics of the lobster match the values of the society portrayed. Longevity, blue blood, potency, all of these characteristics are completely self-serving, just like the actions of the characters in the film, as well as their motivation to enter relationships with other people. The characters in The Lobster act completely selfish. They are cold and calculating. This is particularly evident in their strange way of talking. Each of the characters says exactly what they mean, unless it's convenient to lie. This is a very conscious decision. The characters should not appear emotional or empathetic in any way, but completely strange. In their communication with each other, this is so exaggerated that it looks almost funny. A good example of this is the scene in which David argues with two other men at the shooting range. The most important characteristic of the lobster, which is not even mentioned in the film, is another one. This sheds a different light on the relationship between David and the nameless myopic woman. Myopia is the common ground on which they base their relationship. This may recall the first sentence the viewer hears from David's mouth. The woman pays for the relationship with her eyesight. At the end of the film, David faces a difficult choice. You can see him standing in front of a mirror in the toilet of a fast food restaurant with a knife pointed at his eye. There are three options for him. The first would be to make a sacrifice, like the woman did, to have a common ground again, which despite everything seems important to her, because even the two people who have more or less successfully resisted all existing relationship models basically yearn for the classic construct of an old-fashioned relationship in this world. By that, David would commit a completely selfless act, something that contradicts the nature of people in the world of the lobster. At the same time, however, at least in the context of the film, he would refute the theory that love is only a social construct and that basically every person acts completely self-serving and that a relationship only comes about out of purpose. The second option would be not to take his eyesight. That would be a selfish decision, but he could easily pretend to have stabbed his eyes out and thus put the relationship above himself and his own good, which she would never know because she's blind herself. So he would lie for pure self-interest, but at the same time maintain the relationship. Finally, there would be the option not to take his eyesight, but to be honest about it to the woman, which would probably end the relationship. The question remains, is love just a social construct?
Slow, but when she's blinded by Loner Leader, she won't let me kiss her when nobody else is around, so she's still following the rules and conventions of the hotel and of society at large, even though we've already been breaking the rules of the society that we're now in, of the loners in the forest. And I was like, wow, how conditioned these characters are.
To answer this, another question must first be clarified. Does David take his eyesight? We never get to know in the film. If he does take his eyesight, true love is possible. Despite all contradictions, David and the blind woman have found each other. If he does not take his eyesight, love is only a social construct, just an ideal imposed by society, no matter whether David ultimately lies to the woman or not. Ironically enough, the blind woman is not acting selflessly herself. When the leader of the fugitives takes her eyesight, she asks, "So, does David take his eyesight or not?" Lanthimos refuses to answer this very question for the viewer. The aim of the film is not to bombard the viewer with empty aphorisms like "love is blind" or "love is a lie." Lanthimos deliberately leaves questions unanswered. It serves as a stylistic device. Other questions remain unanswered as well. Has the lisping man turned into a parrot? What happened to the cruel woman? In the context of the film, it makes a lot more sense to leave some questions unanswered. The viewer is forced to ask the question to himself and also to answer it for himself. In this way, the core issue of the film has a much larger remaining impact. It is a question that cannot be answered globally, not even in the limited world of the Lobster. In the end, the question is left to the individual. The individual as such is also questioned in the Lobster. With their cold nature, the characters could falsely give the impression of being unemotional, but they are not. They argue, they cry, rather they lack connection to their fellow human beings. The relationships that make up the occupants of the facility are superficial. They talk to each other as you usually do with a complete stranger. The same applies to the loose friendships David builds up in the hotel. We never even get to know their names. All of these people may share superficial similarities, but not deeper values or passions. Every depth and complexity is missing, intentionally. Due to the social pressure to find a partner, the characters in The Lobster are satisfied with these superficialities. A good example of this: newly married couples are assigned a child by the management of the hotel in a very short time in order to strengthen the relationship. The absurdity is hardly surprising in this film. Applied to our real world, however, this motif is particularly thought-provoking. In today's society, and not just in Western society, the expectation of couples to have a child is still very real. This puts many couples under pressure, while others have a child unexpectedly or unintentionally. The fact that childless couples could be just as happy is not even considered in the Lobster's world. This way of thinking is also transferable to our real world. The society in The Lobster is not to be understood as a dystopian fiction about the future. Rather, it shows a Kafkaesque, alternate and exaggerated reality in which relationships are enforced in an almost fascistically meticulous way as a social ideal. A good example of this is the scene in which David is seriously questioned by a security guard when, after returning to the normal world with a blind woman, he stands alone in a public building for a moment. The society in The Lobster idealizes a completely black and white image of all relationship matters. When he is admitted to the hotel, David is asked about his sexual orientation. When he says that he has been intimate with both women and men, he is told that there is no bisexual option, just straight or gay. There is no place for grey areas in the world of The Lobster or in the thinking of the people who live in it. Even when David answers 44.5 when asked about his shoe size, he is told that there are no half sizes. Relationship models are viewed in the same way. You are in a relationship or not. There is nothing in between. The couple as the overall idea runs through the entire film. Sometimes very subtly in the background, sometimes very obviously. At the beginning of his stay in the hotel, David is tied with a hand on his back. This should make it clear to him how valuable it is to have two things of the same kind. The hotel manager explains to David this unusual procedure in the hotel. Then there are some shots in which David has great difficulty finding his way with one hand. Couples can also be found again and again as visual means. In the entire film, objects appear in pairs. 2 water glasses on the table, 2 boats in the sea. Just like the hotel staff, these are always seen in pairs. The irony of the idealized couple lies in the aforementioned emotional distance between the people in The Lobster. The characters are distant and cold. This is also conveyed visually throughout the film. The set design deliberately avoids lively, warm or bright colors. A palette between black, grey and white runs throughout the film. If colors do occur, they are usually pale and lifeless. In addition, the entire film seems to have a slight green tint that drains even more life out of it. This atmosphere is also supported by camera work. It works with calm, mostly static settings and unobtrusive perspectives. Shots are held for a long time. The soundtrack is orchestral and slow. That also fits well with the atmosphere. This is a property that the whole film has for itself. It feels slow, and that benefits it. The viewer feels like the characters in the film. Everyday life in the hotel is slow and painful, and yet the characters seem constantly rushed. From the imposed urge to finally enter a relationship that is exercised by the authorities, the expiring time to find a partner is constantly in view, as is the threatened degradation to the animal. Some of the characters suffer particularly because they are desperately looking for a partner. Ironically, the harder the characters try, the harder time they're having finding a partner. The lisping man, for example, remains lonely as far as is known. The biscuit woman, who throws herself at everyone's neck in complete hopelessness and thereby throws all self-esteem overboard, seems to be actually repulsive to the characters in the film. She tries very hard to find a partner and ends up being so intolerably lonely that she kills herself with an announcement. As in real interpersonal relationships, an overly strenuous search for a partner is received as unattractive. The other characters seem almost disgusted by the character of the biscuit woman. Then there are those who are viewed by society as negative or suspicious because they do not seem to need the concept of a relationship, represented in the film by the heartless woman. She got along wonderfully even without the relationship with David, which despite her nature she entered. Due to her aggressive personality, she was able to prolong her stay in the hotel again and again by chasing fugitives. So she's the only character in the film that leverages the system provided by the authorities without breaking the rules. Her character is a unique exception throughout the film. Transferred to real society as a metaphor, one could imagine the terrible woman, for example, as a person who is asexual or aromantic and therefore not interested in a classic love relationship. The desire to bond with another person is considered normal in most societies. Though there is hardly ever the question, where does this phenomenon come from? One might argue that, purely biologically, it is due to a possible instinctive desire for reproduction. However, this view is not relevant at this point, because it is now, although widely used, relatively easy to disprove. The best example of this is provided by humans. The modern, enlightened person has, in most cases, when it comes to sexual intercourse, the pure pleasure in mind and not reproduction. In addition, as already mentioned, there are also asexual people. People who experience no pleasure from sex at all, for whom the concept of sexual intercourse is of no interest in any way. So where does the desire to bond with a person come from, that is, the concept of monogamy? To answer this question, one has to deal primarily with the concept of marriage, a model that socially recognizes a monogamous relationship before a higher authority. Marriage is a contract between the two partners, a theoretically lifelong commitment, and various bilateral concessions. According to the outdated view of many evolutionary historians, monogamy has emerged from the promiscuity over time as a social ideal, precisely because it offers certain advantages and certainties. According to anthropologist Helen, for example, there are similarities in different societies when it comes to choosing a partner for monogamous relationships. Above all, this consists in the partner being selected for properties such as attractiveness, as in the world of the lobster. In most societies, however, this theory, teleologically speaking, defies logic. For example, in Germany, there are now half as many marriages as 50 years ago. In societies where people live relatively well, traditional relationship models are becoming increasingly unpopular. Men and women no longer have to conform to classic role models. Promiscuity is no longer considered negative. Other sexual orientations or alternate relationship models are also finding increasing acceptance. What is a positive development in itself is viewed with resentment by many conservative people. Even in socially very liberal societies, heteronormative monogamous relationships are still sometimes idealized. Humans are creatures of habit after all. In his famous work, Sex at Dawn, which he wrote together with his wife, Cacilda Jethá, author Christopher Ryan aptly describes marriage, mating, and love are socially constructed phenomena that have little or no transferable meaning outside of a given culture. It is completely absurd how dogmatically we still cling to the concept of the monogamous heteronormative relationship in a world that should be proud to have developed beyond it in self-reflection. This is exactly what Lanthimos tries to convey in The Lobster. Is love a social construct? Perhaps. It may be for some people, but not for others. Relationships in the world of The Lobster are nothing but a social construct. In the end, Lanthimos leaves the viewer to ask himself, is my relationship just a social construct?